welcome again to this next video where I'm going to talk about aggression and gratitude and why these things, these two areas, don't seem like they belong together, but actually do. So I'm going to tell you a little story about how I came to have a really clear insight about these. It was actually quite recent, even though the ideas aren't new to me. And, I think about aggression and gratitude a lot. But before I do that, I want to define how I'm using the word aggression, because I think in our culture, there is a connotation of anger attached to it. And that is not how I'm using the term. So to me, aggression is an energy of applying your will in the world, an energy. So kind of like a dentist needs aggression to drill a tooth, right? To heal it, to fix it, to fill it correctly. They're not doing it because they're angry at the patient or the tooth, I hope. But, in the ideal, right? You need that aggression in order to cut through something, like a surgeon would need to cut through flesh in order to perform the surgery. So I'm not using it to mean violence. I'm not using it to mean yelling or pushing or arguing in any way, being belligerent, being nasty, being mean, all of which have been used to denote aggression in our culture. And I think that's wrong. I think that that's incorrect. That is, it would be better served by broadening the term. So I just wanted to start with that, because otherwise the rest of this talk is going to sound weird to you. Excuse me. So here's the story. Here's how I came to have this clarity about it that I wanted to share. So, as I've mentioned before, I'm a new gardener, and I have this old garden bed that was left here by previous property owners. And I've been cultivating that garden bed. I've been using it, but there's a tree that stands right in front of it and blocks the morning sunshine. And I pruned it a little bit last year. And this year I decided I wanted to prune it some more so that I could take away some of these bushier branches on the sides and let more sunshine through, so that the plants that I have behind it, which is something like 14 plants or something, it's quite a large garden bed, they could have some sun and they can thrive. So I have a couple of cool tools to cut off branches. Some of them are, thicker, some of them are thinner. So I'm at this tree and I'm cutting these branches, and I notice that I feel guilty. I feel guilty that I'm cutting down a living thing. I'm not killing it. And even though in my head I knew that pruning a tree is actually beneficial to some degree, I felt guilty, right? So that was me being in my habitual, although I've worked on it quite a bit, but I've fallen into the habitual fear and shame around my aggression. I needed aggression to cut down some of that tree. And I felt guilty about it. So I didn't realize it right away. The way I realized it was that every time I made a cut with my shears, I would go, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I said it so much that it was like a mantra. And I noticed that I don't know, it's not a mood, but it's just, I guess, the best term. My inner state was changing, and I was feeling worse and worse and worse. I felt so guilty and I felt so terrible. And each branch I cut down, It's a big tree, it's not like I was taking this puny little thing and cutting off most of it. It had a lot of branches and it was very bushy, but didn't matter. I still felt guilty. And I caught that. When I caught that, I changed the I'm sorry to thank you. And you might have seen that little bit of advice floating around in social media in the last couple of years about changing your I'm sorry's to thank yous. So instead of saying I'm sorry I'm late, you say thank you for being patient and thank you for waiting, right? Well, and I heard that some of my teachers and my analysts wording became clear because they were using it all the time. And I really took it to heart, and I started working on catching myself at saying I'm sorry when what I really mean is thank you. Because the thing is, as I was saying I'm sorry over and over, it became more and more about me. I was punishing myself. I was feeling terrible. I was, kind of like collapsing, right? And even though I seemed to be apologizing to the tree, really, it was not quite an apology because I was still cutting it, right? And I don't think that I was damaging it. And the intent was not to damage either. The intent it was to prune it so that it could share the sunlight, And so it became more and more about me, and I changed that. So when I changed it to thank you, then each branch I cut, I kept saying thank you. And I was thanking the tree for giving up its branches so that I could have some sunlight for my other plants. And what was interesting, not only did my mood and my state start to lift, but I started noticing that some of the branches I was cutting down actually needed to be cut down, and probably long ago. Some of them were actually moldy. Not all, it's a healthy tree in general, but some of them were dry, some of them were dying. And I realized that while I was feeling sorry, I wasn't seeing that. All I was seeing was damage. All I was seeing was that I was hurting this tree. And when I changed to the thank you, I noticed that I was helping the tree as well, right? So some of the, it would have been fine without me cutting down some of those bushy living branches, but I would have also never seen the ones that actually needed to come down. Or if I did see them, I would use that as kind of like, well, at least I also helped it, it would have still been like, it would have still been about me, right? So that was me being ashamed of my aggression, right? So I'm just checking out my notes here real quick. So I also want to share a place where I didn't do so well with my aggression, and it has nothing to do with this particular experience with the tree. But I just want to give you an example of the other side. So it still relates to gardening because that's kind of where my inspiration is coming from these days. When it was late March, I started a bunch of seedlings. I started seeds in little pods to grow. And, if you know anything about gardening, or if you don't, I'll tell you that when you start seeds, you deliberately start too many because some of them may not germinate. And if you only start as many as you need, you'll probably wind up with about 80%. So you start too many. And there is a chance that more of them will germinate, right? So this is what happened to me. Some of the seeds I started, so like, let's say I'll start a pod of tomato seeds. You put 2 or 3 into each pod, thinking that, 1 or 2 of those may not germinate. And for some, that was the case. But for a lot of the pods I started, all 2 or 3 germinated. So now I had, 2 to 3 times the number of seedlings that I needed. Some of them were puny and not good, so I was able to discard them. But here's what happened. I couldn't own my aggression enough to get rid of those insurance plants, those plants that I planted as extra just in case some don't germinate. And I separated them and I gave them their own little pots. And then I had too many plants. And I was able to sell some of them. I had to figure out what to do with them because now I had too many. And so where I couldn't have, I didn't have the heart, as they say, I didn't have the heart to kill them. I was seeing it as killing them. And I mean, I think it's true, a seed is the germ for life. And I didn't have the heart to kill those little seedlings. I mean, if they were like an inch tall, this is what gardeners do. You pick the strongest, and that is the point. You pick the strongest and you let those grow, and the rest you cut out, throw away or compost, hopefully, if you have that. So I wound up with too many plants, and then I got overwhelmed, right? So when I couldn't prune those, branches, to use the tree metaphor as a metaphor, when I couldn't prune, I wound up inundated. I wound up overwhelmed. So it came back to haunt me, as it were. So this is something I'm going to be working on, where I have to learn how to own that aggression and get rid of those, the weakest ones, so that the rest of it can thrive, and so that I'm not overwhelmed, that I can take care of what's left. So that's the fallout is, I planted most of those plants, the ones I couldn't sell and such. And now I'm going to need to use more resources than I had planned on, more fertilizer, more water, more physical energy, more time in the garden to water them and fertilize and so on. So the long-term effects of not owning that aggression are visible here. So I was editing this video and realized that there's one other area that I wanted to just relate what I said to before I wrap it up, and that is the relational component, right? So I kept talking in terms of the garden and in terms of, cutting plants and things like that. But by that same token, you can talk about if somebody, invites you to an event that you don't want to go to, or, um, so there, anyway, there is a no involved, and that's not the only form of aggression we exercise. Sometimes a yes is also a form of aggression, not as I said in the beginning, not um, as any kind of violence, but a force in the world, which can be a yes, very much so, right? So to say no or yes, but let's stay with the no for a second, where if somebody says, oh, can you help me move? And your back is kind of sore, but you don't want to say no, but you also don't really want to say yes, and you have to weigh it a little bit and you have to think about it. But really in your gut, you really feel like you should say no because you need to take care of yourself. Saying yes in a situation where you really actually need to say no, you wind up hurting yourself the way I hurt myself by keeping too many seedlings alive, right? So yeah, by not exercising that energy, that will in the world, which I've been calling aggression, you potentially wind up, being haunted by it later. Let's say you do help that person move and then you really throw out your back. So it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as, oh, I should have said no, or I should have said yes. This is why I wanted to go deeper on this, where that aggression is a nuanced choice in the world. And the more conscious you can make it, the better, which is why I'm talking about this, why I feel like it's so important, so that you can mean what you say, right? That you are authentic and show up in the world, and that you can be trusted, that people do actually trust your word, that you mean what you mean, you mean what you mean. um, I got a little flustered with the camera for a second. Okay. And another relational thing I wanted to connect this to is when you are speaking some truth. Sometimes it's a difficult one. Let's say you need to say something that the other person might find challenging to hear. Sometimes it's just really authentic and really powerful, like looking someone in the eye and saying something really meaningful and loving and kind, that can also be surprising or maybe challenging for the person to take in. And so all of those are a form of that kind of energy that I'm talking about. You see how hard it is to use that word aggression, because it is that forward energy. And I think that maybe the word aggression is used because it is of the impact that it has. The sometimes it's painful to hear, like for somebody to say, look, I think you're addicted to something, right? Or to say, I don't like that. I don't think that your driving is safe anymore. you know it can be said with so much love, and yet still be shocking and challenging to hear. And so I'm kind of putting that into that same realm of exercising that will in the world, and that what I'm calling what I'm lumping under the idea of aggression. I think it actually is meaningful to do that. So saying something meaningful, something challenging, painful, what have you, is an authentic thing that may need to happen. And if one has a hard time owning their aggression, they will be too afraid to say it, they will hold back. I've had to learn this as a therapist. It's still a challenge sometimes. Sometimes when I see something in a session and I need to say something, or I think about whether I need to say it first. I don't just blurt things out, but if there's a pattern I'm seeing, if there's something that I really need to point out, people do say, well, I want to know whatever you see. That's why I come see you. And still, it can be painful to hear, and so I've had to work on owning that aggression in myself. It was part of my training, part of my supervision. My very first supervisor has had to talk to me about that, how I would have a hard time bringing up a topic, even though I knew it was important for that person to at least have it be on the table, but I wouldn't say anything. And then I would, talk to my supervisor, and she would say, sounds like you're afraid of your aggression. And it was like, what do you, what aggression? I'm not trying to be aggressive, but now I understand what she meant. And it took me a long time, and I integrated that. And it still comes up sometimes. Sometimes I'll say something to a client, especially at the end of a session. It happens because there isn't time to kind of be like, wait, what did I just say? Or how does that feel to hear, or what have you? And then the session ends and I go, oh, yikes, maybe that was hard to hear. And there wasn't time for me to hold that space and talk it through. So that's aggression at work. And the more you own it, the more real you actually become, because the more you own it, the less that aggression comes through as an attack and as a piercing or some kind of hammering or what have you, right? Those terms we use, right, that are so almost like violent, right, or quite or just violent, um, because the more you own it, the less violent, the more kind you become. And then, as I was saying, your word starts to mean something real, and that connects to my next point, which is in the original video. And so this is why I put the aggression and gratitude together, because if I were to get rid of those extra plants, the way I got rid of those extra branches, right? It would, I mean, not to get rid of all of them so that I have nothing, right? You understand. Um, it would, the ones that would be left would be that much more precious to me. And I would use the proper amount of resources that I planned. And they would be that much more precious, and I would have that much more gratitude, as opposed to potentially being fatigued, being resentful, right? Being mad at myself for, giving myself so much extra work just because I couldn't kill a few little seedlings, right? You see how those two actually go together. To be grateful for that which one consciously chooses, as opposed to that kind of anxious, oh, I'm afraid to lose it, or I'm afraid, I don't want to feel guilty, I don't want to feel ashamed, so I'm just going to do it all. And then you get resentful and overwhelmed and both, and layer one on top of another. So I hope this is useful. I'm sure there's way more to say about it, and you'll have ideas for how else this can spin out and what other insights one can get from this. And please share those. I would love to read them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.